Hello Year 6, it's good to be back with RE again. Welcome to your second lesson, and today we're looking at the question of how did Protestantism and then the Church of England split off from Roman Catholicism in Europe. And if you remember back to last lesson, I said there are three major branches of Christianity in the world. Do you remember what they are? I've already mentioned two of them. Protestantism, Catholicism, and Eastern Orthodoxy, or just Orthodoxy. And so basically, if you look at this map, before 1500, before this split that we're going to look at, Europe was basically already split between Eastern Orthodox Christianity in the east and between Roman Catholicism in the west. So we can look at this map and we can see places like Britain and Ireland, places like Norway and Denmark and even Northern Africa were under the control of the Catholic Church in Rome. And then on the other hand, you've got places that are like modern day Turkey and Greece, Syria, Armenia, Russia, Ukraine, Belarus. They all came under the Orthodox Church. And that was until 1530. So if you look in your booklet today, you'll notice that you do have all of the slides that we're going to look at. And as we go through, you'll need to be answering the questions that are here. So if you have a read through those questions first, then you'll know when to stop and fill in the answers. So, this was the situation up until the 1500s in Europe. The Roman Catholic Church, hugely powerful across the whole of Western Europe, until something called the Reformation. And the Reformation was a religious movement that came about in the 1500s, specifically in the 1530s, and it changed the face of Christianity basically right up until the modern day. The leaders of the Reformation disagreed with the Catholic Church on certain religious issues. Something like, specifically, they disagreed with something called indulgences. And this is where you could go to your local Catholic church, give them a huge pile of money, and the priest would say, okay, now you get into heaven, or at least you get to skip the stage of purgatory, which is in between sort of a waiting room before you get into heaven. And these people, especially Martin Luther, who we're going to look at the moment, looked at that and said, that's corrupt. That's not how Christianity works. That's not how heaven works. And they weren't happy with it. And it wasn't really the done thing to criticise the Catholic Church. They were hugely powerful. So here you can see this is people, in this case this is Protestants, but Catholics. It was a very violent time, being burnt at the stake for having the temerity to disagree with what the Catholic Church said, or later when the Protestant Reformation happened, to disagree with what the Protestant Church said. Here is a monument, and you can see these in churches in England, where people who believed in the Reformation and in changing the way that churches were run, they actually went in and they took off the heads of religious figures. They believed that these figures represented the power and the might and the money of the Catholic Church, and they didn't want those in their churches. So when you go into a church in England, do look out for that, because you can see that in lots of churches. You can see where the heads of statues were taken off. In the early 1500s, almost everyone in Western and Central Europe, including the UK, was Roman Catholic, and the church was very, very powerful. The Reformation began in 1517, and in that year, a German priest called Martin Luther circulated a list of doubts he had about certain Catholic beliefs. And this is a picture of Martin Luther up here on the right. Martin Luther, you might recognise that name because that's who Martin Luther King, who was a later civil rights activist, he was named after Martin Luther because his family were Protestant pastors. Martin Luther, very brave man, took these beliefs that he had about indulgences and about lots of other things that the Catholic Church was doing, and he actually nailed those to the door of his local Roman Catholic cathedral. Soon after, Luther actually took it a step further and rejected the authority of the Pope and the Church, and the Pope was not happy about this at all. He sent Luther a letter called a papal bull, and Luther took that letter and he burned it in his town square, as you can see here. This is a very famous engraving of Luther burning the papal bull. He thought that people could learn all religious truths directly from the Bible and not necessarily from priests and the Pope, and he called for most of the sacraments or rituals of the end of most of the sacraments or rituals of Catholicism. So things like the priest going out and anointing people with oil, or the priest being able to bless people or offer indulgences, and all these sorts of things. He thought that actually Christians should just read the Bible. Yes, they can go to church to worship and pray together, but it shouldn't be led solely by a priest. It should be everyone involved in doing that. So how does this affect Britain? Because Britain didn't immediately go over to Protestantism. It was still a Catholic country well into the 1500s. The Pope condemned Luther's teachings, but his message spread very quickly, and it spread especially throughout what is now modern-day Germany, and Poland and the Netherlands and Norway and Sweden. Not so much France and Spain and Italy, because these were very strongly Catholic areas, but definitely Central Europe, focused on Germany. Then along comes Henry VIII, and if you know anything about Henry VIII, he had 6 wives eventually, but at this stage he didn't have 6 wives. He wanted to divorce himself from the wife that he had and take on a new wife, but the Catholic Church and the Pope are very against divorce. Even today they don't particularly care for divorce, but back then you couldn't get divorced and then remarried inside the Catholic Church. So Henry VIII, after lots of toing and froing, established a new Protestant church, taking on some of the teachings of Luther, and called it the Church of England, and made himself the leader of that church, and then gave himself a divorce, which is what he always wanted. And that is how the Church of England came about, and it still has the Queen as the head of the church. It's still separate from the church in Rome, and it's still a Protestant church. So, by the mid-1600s, Europe was mostly now divided not only into Orthodox and Catholic, but into Orthodox and Catholic and Protestant. Most of these divisions have remained in place. Germany is still, especially northern Germany, mostly a Protestant country. The Netherlands is a fairly Protestant country. England is a fairly Protestant country. However, Ireland, more Protestant in the north, but mostly a Catholic country. Scotland, split between Catholic and Protestant. Very interesting, the divides that there are in Europe that all trace their roots back to the Reformation in the 1500s, to Martin Luther, who just wasn't happy with how the church was being run. And I could honestly talk all day about the violence and the bloodiness that spread across Europe because of the division between these two churches, especially in the 1600s. But maybe your Key Stage 3 secondary school history teacher will get to teach you about that, which is great. So taking a look at the booklet, make sure that you've got last lesson filled in, which was some definitions about the words that we talked about last lesson and some questions, and you've got most of the information to those questions in the reading there. And then take a look at the lesson for today. All the slides that I've just gone through are on there, and then you've got some pretty straightforward questions, but I'd like to see full sentence answers to these, please. If I was going around in class and you were just writing single words, I would pick it up and I would say, no, go back, full sentences. I'm not sure at the moment if I'm going to be teaching this next week virtually or whether we're going to be back in school. We'll see, but either way, I'll be doing RE with Year 6 next week in some form. So I'll see you then. Bye-bye.